Hello, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. Continuing in the book of Matthew, we're at verse 17. And very critical teaching here. Let's take a look. Jesus says, and this is, of course, the continuation of the Sermon on the Mount, one of Jesus' most famous framers. Don't mean to be silly, but I need to stretch out my mouth. I sit here silently in preparation. I didn't shave today. Oh well. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, very famous, but ask people what's in it. That's why I have a song. If you don't know what's in it, you can memorize it. I have a song on my website you can download for free. All my stuff is free. And you can try to put it in your head. I don't claim to have it the best, so to speak, sound, but it definitely will help you pierce your brain. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy but fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And that's part of Jesus preaching that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he's saying, think not I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy but fulfill. That's important that he says that, because he could say, I'm not going to do anything about the law and the prophets at all. You know what I'm saying? I'm just here to echo the law and the prophets, to say the same thing the law and the prophets say. But he says there's something about the law that he is doing that has an effect on the law, and that is he's fulfilling the law. And you notice that both these verses end with the word fulfill. He came to not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And he says, because none of the law is going to pass away. No jot or tittle. And there's been people who have, because these words don't seem to be actually words. One dab or doodle, you could say in English. But a jot could refer to the smallest pointing of the vowel, or the smallest Hebrew letter, yod. Is it called yod? The smallest Hebrew letter is the what we would call Y, but it's just like a little, looks like an apostrophe essentially. Very small letter. And then I forgot if it was I forgot what the name of the vowel point was. I used to know more about this stuff because I haven't thought about Hebrew vowel pointing like in detail in a long time, because I don't try to read it anymore and all that, because it doesn't serve me well. Tittle. Now that someone said, Bullinger actually, he's a Hebrew scholar, he suggested that it was the tagin, which are these little ornamental things that get put on the law, and but only that's not, it doesn't affect the meaning at all. I don't know. I think what he means is just like, not even the littlest thing of the law is going to pass, okay? The least commandment, the least adornment upon a commandment, that's fine. Until, the fact that he says until, I think my mic's a little loud. Until he said, the fact that he says until means that at some point the law is going to pass away. You know, in the kingdom of heaven, they asked him, the Pharisees, his enemies, said, there was a man who had, a woman who had several husbands, and all according to the law. She married one guy, he died. Then she married another, he died. And she married another, and he died. And they said, therefore, in the resurrection, whose husband shall she be? And that's a funny point, because a lot of times people say, like, oh, I'll be together forever with them in heaven. And, like they'll carry down their married life. It's funny, because there isn't a religion on the face of the earth, I think, that teaches that. Well, actually, maybe some paganistic ones where they bury the virgins with the king and all that kind of creepy stuff. Certainly not in Christianity. There's no teaching that says that, because Jesus said that in the kingdom of heaven they neither marry nor are given in marriage. So whence the law on adultery? I mean, there's no place for it at that time. I'm sorry, what? You're no. I'm sorry, what? You're on the thing, by the way. Let me see, hold on. But it's recording. So this study is buffering heavily, is the report. So, yeah, I know. My satellite connection is not the greatest. Here it comes again. It's okay, the study is recording and it is receiving a video signal. But the students are not happy because the buffering is so lengthy. And where was I? Like I said, if it buffers and all that, the thing is, it still records, and you still get to listen to it. So sometimes it's better to tune into the stream after it begins. The live aspect of it is, yeah, I can see the kilobytes are going out. Okay, anyways. So where was I? Passed, one jot or one tittle shall no wise pass in the law till all be fulfilled. It's good to have someone on hand to let me know there are problems. But on the other hand, if I have no actual problem, it can be a distraction. So the law, saying that it till it be fulfilled, indicates that there's something going on with the law here. In the book of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul in chapter 3 of 2 Corinthians says pretty unequivocally that the law has been abolished in Christ. In Christ. This is a point that people really have trouble with, certain people. Because, like we in this country, people want to put up the 10 Commandments and on courthouses and put them in different places and stuff. The 10 Commandments, as if the 10 Commandments were the be-all, end-all of righteousness, when it's really just sort of like the minimum standard. Thou shalt not kill. This is not the rocket science of righteousness, the 10 Commandments. And Jesus doesn't say the 10 Commandments. He's talking about the law as a whole. Now, of course, the law as a whole sort of begins and ends with the 10 Commandments. It doesn't end there. I shouldn't say it begins and ends. There's a lot more to the law than the 10 Commandments. There's hundreds of commandments, hundreds of statutes, hundreds of ordinances, dealing with all manner of things, from marriage law, divorce law, dietary restrictions, clothing restrictions, sacrificial regulations, all kinds of different things along that line. Sorry, it's distracting me too now. What is causing these issues? Okay. But, you have all these different things in the law. Ordinances, laws. Exactly. And Christians do not apply all of them to themselves. They do not apply everything. But they'll say, oh, well, the Ten Commandments apply. Really, just the Ten Commandments. Like, on what basis can you tell me that is the basis where we draw the line? Where exactly do we draw the line? So it's not just the Ten Commandments. And the proof is in what Jesus is about to teach us. That the Ten Commandments are not sufficient righteousness. And that's what he's talking about when he says, when he compares, when he says, compare your righteousness to the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. If your righteousness does not exceed theirs, you're not going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, when I say the law is passed away, Jesus said the law won't pass away till all be fulfilled. What I'm saying is, Jesus, what did he say at the first verse? I have come to fulfill the law. And the question is, did he accomplish that mission? Did he fulfill the law? Paul says to all be fulfilled. What all scripture, all prophecy, all. I don't think that's what he referred to. He does mention the prophets. I did not come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill the law and the prophets. And he was fulfilling them. Now you can say, well, he hasn't fulfilled the second advent. Yeah, but the law aspect is fulfilled. Now, when I talk about the law being passed away, I just mean in terms of Christians. If you are an active Christian, the law has no power over you anymore because the blood of Christ has covered you. That doesn't mean you can sin with impunity. What it means is you can be righteous without restriction, without hindrance. What it means is his Spirit is active in you and leading you to righteousness, holiness, and to godliness. It does not mean you can just break the law, because the law is for law breakers. And the idea is that in Christ we are law keepers. All right? And the thing is, what Jesus lays out isn't the Ten Commandments. In a sense, I think he has a dual meaning here. When he talks about fulfilling the law, he doesn't just mean to fulfill it in the sense of to complete it by his actions, to put it to rest and that sort of thing, but rather to expand on it, to make the law more effectual by specifying things. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So when he talks about, break these least commandments, does I've never taught anyone to break the commandments. But Paul, you're going to say, or someone might say, and they'd have a good argument. Well, what about the Sabbath day? What about the Sabbath day? That's a good question. What about the Sabbath day? The Sabbath day is a commandment that is of much dispute. It's one of the when people talk about the Ten Commandments, they're almost always talking about the Sabbath day. Not everyone, but keeping the Sabbath day. Now, for some people that means well, you gotta be in church on Sunday. That's the keeping of the Sabbath day. For other people, it's no, you've got to be in church on Saturday, not Sunday. Not Sunday, in fact. Definitely not Sunday. For some people, keeping church on Sunday is the mark of the beast. Or it will turn into the mark of the beast when they pass a national Sunday church attendance, mandatory church attendance law. I guess this is something out of The Handmaid's Tale or something. They believe in these certain denominations that someday, and this goes back to I forgot her name, but she was one of the founding people behind the Seventh-day Adventists. And her thing was, they believed that the Sunday Sabbath was this oppression that was going to turn into the mark of the beast. And of course, that's ridiculous. We've moved everything away from that as far as a country. The idea that someone's going to come in, and the first thing on their list is going to be a national law requiring attendance in church on Sunday. And you'd ask, well, if the Sabbath is Saturday, what's wrong with going to church on Sunday, by the way? Because the commandment had nothing to do with going to church. It had to do with rest, right? It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, for in 7 days the Lord made heaven and earth, or in 6 days the Lord made this heaven and earth, and the seventh day he rested. Therefore keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy, keep it separate, keep it different. So, well, you keep it holy by going to church. Really? But the way they kept it holy in the Old Testament times was to not work that day and to stay in their tents and not go about doing servile labor or manual labor. You were to do no labor at all on the Sabbath day. And so, in fact, as I said, Jesus, there's an incident in the gospel, and maybe we'll get there eventually. I forget if it's in Matthew, but where his disciples are walking through the corn, picking it through the fields. It's not corn like maize, it's like American corn. It's whatever it was, whatever kind of grain they were picking and eating the grain, and they were faulted for it, and with good cause, because in the Old Testament, during the time of the manna, when they were picking the manna, when the Lord was sending manna from heaven and feeding the Israelites in the wilderness, there were people who went out on the Sabbath day to look for manna. And they were, and the Lord says, how long will you break my commandments? How long will you disobey me? Or refuse to keep my commandments? Something like that. When we get to that passage about the corn, we will go there. And we will examine that more closely, because it's important. One of the things Paul said was, do not let anyone judge you in respect to the Sabbath day or the keeping of a holy day. So, is he the least in the kingdom of heaven for teaching people to break the Sabbath? No, because Paul didn't teach anyone to break the Sabbath. Jesus, it's not here, but Jesus fulfills the Sabbath. And he becomes our rest. So I never would tell anyone, don't keep the Sabbath. What I'm saying is, we keep the Sabbath in a more perfect way. We keep the Sabbath according to the spirit of what the Sabbath means. It's like they were acting out carnally and outwardly this don't work, be at rest thing, because the Spirit of God had not been given whereby they might exercise the peace and rest of the Sabbath at all times. One man honors one day above another man honors every day alike, the Apostle Paul taught. And, that refers specifically to things like the Sabbath. Because if the Sabbath is not honoring one day above another, then what is it? That's why I ask him, if that's not honoring one day above another, what is it? That's what it is. That's what the Sabbath is. It's the elevation of a single day above others. Whereas it is acceptable in Christ to honor every day alike. So every day becomes a Sabbath day, because we are in Christ at all times. So we have him with us, and we enter into rest throughout the day in the midst of labor. We don't, you make every day sacred and holy by walking in the Spirit. And so that is the fulfillment of the Sabbath, not the disregard of it. And as I've often pointed out, you go to a church, look at some of these Sabbath-keeping churches and ask and see how closely they're adhering to the Old Testament commandment of keeping the Sabbath day holy. You go and then you sit down at their potluck dinners, and people are washing dishes afterwards, right? They're, if they get a flat tire, they change their tire. If they've got a little extra work to do at home, they do it. But they think just going to church on Sunday fulfills the Sabbath. And you're not as righteous as the scribes and Pharisees, because they did a lot more on keeping that day than you do. It's like, well, the Spirit and all that, and I have Jesus in me. And it's like, oh, you do. So you admit that it's not just this outward keeping of the carnal commandment. And then that gets into what Jesus is talking about with the scribes and Pharisees. If your righteousness doesn't exceed their righteousness, because they had a righteousness, the scribes and Pharisees, they're often slammed as being his enemies, and truly they were, but they had an outward righteousness. As Jesus says in chapter 23, they make clean the outside of the cup and the platter. They're like whited sepulchres. They appear righteous outwardly to men, but inwardly they are full of dead men's bones and all corruption, all uncleanness. They're full of extortion and excess within all these things that are within them, and then manifest in a certain way outwardly too. But what the problem was, if you take a legalistic approach to the law, or approach to Christianity even, what happens is you end up with stuff like, repeat after me, I'm a sinner, blah, 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 etc. Now you're saved. Because you repeated those words, I heard you say those words, therefore you are now and forever the beneficiary of eternal salvation through the blood of Christ, just because words were spoken. Well, and if you believed it in your heart, okay, if you did, that's a big if. And, I don't know that even till this day, the fullness of the faith has been given to me. Though I believe, like the guy says in the gospel, I believe, help my unbelief. So let's dive into this part. He says, you've heard that it was said of them, or by them, of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Now, I remember, I forgot, where's my Bible? My good old paper copy, which I don't generally use for this, but I wanted to just check a note on the phrase without a cause, because when I sing this, I don't say those words, and this is going to offend some people possibly, okay, but bear with me a second. And when it comes to offending people, this is kind of funny. Whoever's angry with his brother, because I used to struggle with this thing here, the idea of anger, okay? Without a cause. Yeah, I have a line through it here. Why is that, Paul? Okay, the reason I put a line through it is because some texts of the... it's a note that says, omitted by the LT, I don't even know what that stands for, by this, by that, by the other. Several versions of the New Testament don't have this without a cause. And it smells like, to me, like some sort of addition that someone tried to sneak in there. And it kind of ticks me off. Because, who isn't angry with... is there ever been anyone who was angry without a cause? Do you understand what I'm saying? You gotta understand, the Bible is out there, and there weren't a lot of copies early on, right? And it's not like you can go in and make big changes. This idea people have that the Bible was like assembled by, like this piecemeal over time. That wouldn't work. They'd end up being like 50 versions of the book of Romans. You know what I mean? You'd have, you wouldn't be able to have one book of Romans, but a little dab here with a little scribal addition kind of creeps into the text, and all of a sudden you have the little divergent strains of text. Some versions of the New Testament do not have this without a cause, and I don't understand how you justify it. Angry with his brother without a cause. Of course, you can have a cause and be angry with your brother. Everyone has a cause for being angry. Now, I understand, like, there could be a just cause of angry. Like, he killed your mother, okay? Then now you have cause to be angry, I suppose. But it's like, but he offended you. You have cause. Of course there's cause. There's always cause. Like, does anyone just get angry without a cause? Well, I'll tell you what, if you do get angry without a cause, meaning he has done nothing to offend you, but rather you're just angry because you're angry, your cause has nothing to do with your brother, okay? On that level, I can accept that idea. Like, okay, you're angry, and it's being put off on your brother. And by brother, he means kinsman or close relation, friend. It can be all those things. Countrymen, because these are the Jews, so he would, your fellow Jew, your fellow man, whatever. So, you're angry about, your car broke down or something like that, and you're taking it out on them. That's obviously wrong. They've offended you in some minor point, okay? Or they're not responding in the way you want them to respond to something, and you're angry. I think this is like the cause. If you're going to consider this cause as part of it, it creates complexity. Not that it isn't complex already, because I do think, yeah, obviously, whoever is angry with his brother is a really high standard. Like, you're just angry with your brother. You should never get angry with him. He's your brother. Maybe you should never be angry with him. It's not about your brother's actions. That's why the cause part is a little... Here's another thing about that. Someone's saying, well, Paul, you're suggesting we should scratch that out of our Bible? I'm like, you don't have to. You could just make a note. My Bible has a note that it is omitted by several texts. Here's the thing. What is the likelihood that someone tried to strike that? You know what I mean? What is the likelihood that someone was like, without a cause? That's a loophole. Let's take that out. I never would have dreamed of striking out if it hadn't been noted that it doesn't appear in all texts. I never would have thought, like, oh, this should be omitted. I would have thought, of course, without a cause. Sometimes you need to be angry with your brother. Sometimes it's right to be angry with your brother. Anger is a very dangerous thing. Why do you think he puts it right here? You've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. And his point is about the Pharisees. Their righteousness is, I'm not a murderer. I've never killed anybody. But I hang on. But they would be angry and bitter and vicious towards their brothers and hold themselves guiltless. And what Jesus is saying, the Old Testament commandment, thou shalt not kill, is not strict enough for righteousness. It doesn't fulfill, it does not, fulfill the full thing if you just read it according to the letter. If you don't recognize in yourself the things in you that come out of you that lead to things like murder. When you're angry with your brother, you're participating in the same process that every murderer participates in. You are. It's like, and it's like the same thing with the next one. I'm not going to start talking about it now. But like you start, when someone starts to go murder someone, it starts somewhere. It doesn't just like murder out of the blue. There are steps. And it starts with things like anger. And then these name sort of calling things like Raka. I believe there was Raka. It's kind of a... is that sort of a nonsense word? Oh, I got my Bible Hub. What does the Bible Hub say? Wrong thing. It's popped up in my own face. The live dashboard. Okay, I do not want to see that. Raka. Empty. It's an expression of contempt. It means like empty. Nothing or whatever. It would seem weird for us if I ever go to you, empty! It would be kind of an odd thing to say, right? And I used to say like, bah! Like that, like it's an empty expression. Like try to give an empty expression. It's a expression of dismissal. Like, yeah, you're nothing. You are, it's a diminishment. It's the first step to sort of dehumanizing someone to the point where you can kill them. You know what I mean? Because you kind of have to lower someone's status in your own. They have to be diminished in your eyes, so that you can say your existence is not. Like I can take your existence and there's nothing. It's good. You should be destroyed. And that starts by, in your mind, lowering them in this way, by seeing them as worthless and empty, or fools. I always think online, and one of the things I learned early on when I started discussing things with people, having conversations, or even arguments about the Bible with other believers and stuff, is early on I used my tongue very sharply with people, and it's always. And sometimes it's very hard not to, right? To use words to hurt people. It's very tempting because, like, people will say things that are just like mind-bendingly stupid. People do, and they say stupid things, okay? And they may be stupid. People can be stupid. But the thing is, like, calling them stupid is completely unnecessary. Because if they are, let's say someone is they have low intelligence, is that something they can help? And is that something that you're helping by calling them that? Is that really, that helps? Like, you're stupid. You know what I mean? Like, what? You're not very, you don't, you have a low IQ. It's like, I hear people doing that to each other all the time. Even Christians, especially Christians. Not especially Christians, especially people talking about religious subjects, let's say that. It's not certainly just Christians, but people say, you're stupid. And a lot of times they're saying to people who they know are not stupid. In that case, it's just sort of meant to be some sort of degrading insult. It's like, I don't agree with you. But it is sort of dehumanizing them and saying, you're like, I'm intelligent, I'm up here, and you are just like some stupid creature, like an animal down there. And if we cannot, the gospel is to be accessible to all men. So I mean, if the message I preach is not accessible to the retarded and to people with Down syndrome, then I don't think I have much of a message, because it's not meant to be just for the smartest people in the room. According to the Apostle Paul, not many wise are even called. So if someone isn't hearing me, maybe it's not because they're stupid. Maybe it's just because they're blind. Like spiritually, the Lord has not opened their eyes to it. And so I try to be, I learned to be. Now I do, to be more generous, certainly when it comes to insults of that order. Sometimes, when someone's like, you can criticize their behavior, though. It's like you're being, I'll tell people it's like you're being very insulting and you're being very this, that, the other. And I don't see any problem pointing that out. You're not, your actions do not become a Christian. If it's, criticize people for their moral behavior. Don't be, picking at their mental ability. It's like, I remember I used to say things like, and I would want to, because I knew a lot of times it was true. It's like, you're not intelligent. And when you say that, you make me question your intelligence. Like, I'm not dealing with an intelligent person here. But it's like, what's the point of telling them that? Or to make them feel like, what, angry? Make them angry? Most likely. Or make them feel bad? Most likely what you do is you anger people. The least likely thing you're going to do is just make them feel bad. But is either one desirable? I just want to make them feel like garbage. People write me all the time saying very nasty things about my intelligence and such. And I find it most amusing and least offensive, actually, when they say, I'll pray for you to have eyes to see and ears to hear. It's like, well, say it sincerely, but because sometimes I feel like it's said very tongue-in-cheek, like, I'll pray for you to have, it's like, in the spirit of your letter, it didn't seem like you meant that sincerely. It sounded more like you were hoping I would never open my eyes and that I would just burn in hell forever. That's more of the character of what I'm getting out of what they're saying to me. I don't know why I lifted up this washer for some reason. So, don't have that attitude. Our attitude towards people should be like Christ. We don't know what we're dealing with when we deal with any person. So we need to be careful. We don't need to murdering people begins by dismissing them from our minds as being our brothers, in a sense. We start treating them not like brothers, but like enemies. And Jesus said even our enemies we ought to treat with love. Now, a very specific kind of love. It doesn't say you should be fond of your enemies. Love your enemies like, aren't they great? I love my enemies. I love to watch them stomp on my family and friends. No, that's not what he's saying. He said, bless them. If your enemy is hungered, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire upon his head. That doesn't exactly say that means love your enemy in your actions. Doesn't necessarily mean love him in your heart, because he's your enemy. But you do things, you restrain the rage and anger you might feel towards an enemy, because even though he is an enemy and he's acting as an enemy and he's doing harm to you or people you love, because that's what an enemy is, you never know if this person might be God's chosen vessel, as the Apostle Paul was. So you still treat them with kindness when it's in your power to do so. It doesn't mean you just let them walk all over you or anything like that, but it means we don't seek revenge and things like that, or try to destroy our enemies. These personal enemies. Remember, Christianity is for individuals, not for states. That's what I've always said. It's like you gotta let government be government. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God's. I would not try to get a nation to behave as a Christian as an individual would. So that's my opinion. Because when the kingdom of heaven comes, he's going to destroy all his enemies. So, this is the way we become the children of God. So, I'm off verses here. So you should not kill, you will be in danger of the judgment. And he's saying, he notices, he goes from judgment, hey, whoever is going to be angry with his brother without a good cause, let's say, a really, really good cause, like a really good cause. Like I said, yeah, my brother killed my entire family. At that point, he's almost not your brother anymore, is he? So, let's just not try to look to justify ourselves. I don't like that. I just don't like loopholes. Is that whoever shall call his brother Raka without a cause? Why doesn't it add it there, without a cause? Isn't there sometime okay to just go rah, 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 about your brother, or to dismiss them? Isn't it okay sometimes to just say, thou fool? Now, thou fool, and people will say, well, then don't you say someone's being foolish or whatever? Don't you ever say that this is foolish behavior? It is fine. Like I said, it's like, I don't think it's wrong to say, if I say like, well, murder's okay if, oh boy, I'm trying to think of something foolish. I'm not used to saying, hey, can I think of something foolish to say? So I'm having trouble coming up with an example of something foolish. I'm thinking of things like that. My brain is going like trying to think. I'm like, all dogs eat red bananas. That's foolish, but that's not whatever. Just some sort of foolish statement like that, right? And it's okay to say that is foolish. That's a foolish thing. We should all jump up and put on clown costumes and run through the streets screaming the gospel at the top of our voices, okay? And I could say, I think that's a foolish way to preach the gospel. Because I don't think that someone's ideas, and here's something you've got to learn to do. If you're going to start discussing things with people, disassociate yourself personally with your ideas. And people have trouble with that very often because they take, something, if someone says something critical about an idea they have, they think it's equivalent to saying something critical about them. So, like, if I were to start talking about, like, the rapture doctrine, which I don't believe in, because I believe in the resurrection, etc., etc. Let's say I started being critical of some doctrine I disagree with. Sometimes people will have a tendency to take that very personally. It's unnecessary. We ought not take it personal when people talk about our ideas. So if our ideas are foolish, we need to hear that. We want to know that. I don't think it's wrong to say that ideas are foolish or not a good idea, or even a stupid idea. Although I think in our English, foolish is less insulting than something like stupid. If I say that's a stupid idea, it implies that the person it's coming from is stupid. But I tell you what, even though I think there is some context in which you can use the word foolish or fool, don't be a fool, especially when it's clearly foolish. I'm going to throw myself off the barn to prove that God exists. That's foolish. Don't do that. Don't be foolish and throw yourself to your death, because God is not tempted. Thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God. Or saying, I'm not going to seek medical treatment for this broken leg because God's going to heal me. You're being foolish because there are remedies for that. We know how to. You're expecting God to work a miracle just for you, little old you. And it's not like there's not some way that you could seek treatment. I mean, if there's no treatment, yeah, you better pray because you got no hope otherwise. But it's foolish to not avail yourself of assistance that is available, to not order your life according to the way in which God has made the world to consistently behave. But we should be very careful about using language like that. It is not necessary. I mean, we don't have to say foolish. We don't have to say stupid. We could say, I don't think that's a good idea. You can just avoid the language that is inflammatory and insulting. And that's something I've tried to do, or I've tried to train myself to do over time. I'm only 44 years old at the time of this recording, or I was born in 1973. I always try to give the starting date, and then you can do the math. I was born at the end of 1973. And so my years are such. And at this point in my life, I've gotten better. But, you go back in time, and I was less careful with my words. And you can see that in some of the email conversations I've had with Shepherd's Chapel students. If you go back to the oldest ones, you'll find examples of me being much less generous with my words. And my friends always sympathize with me. They would say, you're so patient. But I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I could have been more patient. God knows, I've deleted a lot of things. It was fun to type them out. But it's nice to have time to buffer things and a chance to just delete. I've often said a lot of times when making comments, I just type them out and then delete them and then move on. Don't actually post them publicly. Say it to yourself. Even write it down on a piece of paper, crumple it up, and throw it in the fire. Some things are just best not said. Best kept to yourself. Practice that. Before you do, before you say something you regret. Because you will regret not saying it a lot less than you will regret, or you're much less likely to regret having kept silence, especially when it comes to saying something that's potentially hurtful. So what Jesus is saying here essentially is that words and our actions and our attitudes towards our brethren are part of what it means to not be a killer. Because we can destroy reputations. We can beat people down. We can cause them to feel internally wounded. And those kind of things are not going to win anybody to the truth. Like making someone feel stupid, if that actually happens, or making them angry by calling them stupid. As far as I know, no one ever won an argument that way. Arguments are won by patient conversation and by being earnest, and it takes a person of quite a upper level humility to have someone come at you, insulting you and battering you, with something. And they're right. They're right. They're insulting you and battering you. Like when Sam Shamoon convinced me of a certain aspect of the Trinitarian teaching, which was that the Father could appear, and the Father could appear as in bodily shape, and not just the Son, which was a mistake I had made personally. I don't know. I just whatever. I just something I had sort of along the line thought, hey, it seems to me like this is the case. He was very straightforward. He was very direct. He brought out the scriptures, but he was never insulting in the least. You know what I mean? There was no insult. He was very cautious about me insulting him, which I thought was funny, because I could tell, like, he's debated a lot of unfriendly people, because I don't practice that sort of thing. But I could tell he was like, if you're going to start insulting me, it was a funny conversation. To already be so much on the defensive as far as on that level, like trying to, and it helps to keep people, I don't know, maybe that's a helpful technique to try to keep people from degenerating into these sort of that sort of negativity. But anyways, if he had come at me battering me, it would have been much more difficult for me to hear him, because what I'm really hearing, I'm just hearing insults. I'm just hearing unkind words. What is the loudest thing about what you're saying? When you're saying something to someone, Jesus said, take heed how you hear. And I say, take heed what you say, because people are going to hear you differently based on the content of your speech. What you say is going to affect how you're heard. So if I'm saying the truth is Jesus, blah, 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 and you're a moron for not understanding that, which part do you think they're going to hear? The blah, blah, blah about Jesus, or the part about I think they're a moron? And in fact, the word here, fool, is moros in Greek, from which we get moron. Remember Arnold Murray, my former teacher, used to say that moros was someone utterly void of spiritual understanding, and that you had to insult them to that level. What he did was basically a big mistake. He basically said, you can call him a fool, just don't call him a moron. And even moron, don't call them someone, And what he did is he raised the bar and said, like, there's a lot of nasty things you can say about people. That's totally okay. Just don't call them the worst thing in the world. And that totally ignores the spirit in which Jesus is giving this. The worst thing that you could do to a person is murder them. That's the worst thing. And he's saying, you know what? There's a least aspect to this commandment. Whoever shall break the least of these commandments. He's going for, there's the big idea of don't kill. But there's also the little idea of don't be mean. Don't be mean. Don't be mean. It's interesting. We think of that as cruel, but actually in the original, or at least from what I understand, the way I think about it, we talk about a mean man, a man of low estate. It is being low. When you're being mean, you're using low blows against people. We passed the halfway mark, and I just want to put out the promotional card real quick. If you like Line by Line Bible Studies, subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies with me, Paul Strangini. Yes, indeed. For more studies, songs, this Bible songs, scripture songs, which I do, which is generally not just a verse or two, but a whole chapter. I have several dozen scripture songs, over 70, including the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. which you can hear if you go to oraclesofgod.org, and there's a songs page, and there's a studies page, and there's a doctrine page, and there's some overlap between them, and etc. There's also, I have a YouTube channel, my personal YouTube space, which this could have been on, I guess, but I wanted to do something special or separate, let's say. Well, that is the same thing, really. Special and separate. So back to the text. So we see how the least commandments being broken makes us the least in the kingdom of heaven. And, you know, I wouldn't read too much into that. Like, I was like, wow, they're actually... I used to think, like, yeah, but they're still in the kingdom somehow. Well, not, you know, in the kingdom of heaven, they're going to call those people the least. I don't know that means that they're going to be part of the kingdom. The whole point is that our righteousness should exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. Because he says, if your righteousness doesn't exceed their righteousness, there's no case in which you will be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. This gets to the blood of Christ. Because, you know, if he hadn't fulfilled all the law for us, there's no way we could enter in. See, they thought they were entering in by their righteousness. The scribes and Pharisees were, you know, they had their version of righteousness. It just drive me nuts. Okay, there we go. They had their version of righteousness, which was an outward righteousness. I don't kill anybody, you SOB. You know, I'd never commit adultery, but look at her. You know, that kind of thing. But we ought to be more righteous than that. Now let's wrap up this first one. There's more to it than that. He says, therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. And it has to do with, you know, the altar. What does it mean? What is he talking about? When you're trying to bring to the altar your gift to God, essentially, because remember they still had sacrificial systems. But a lot of times a gift was not referring to some sort of blood sacrifice, because a blood sacrifice always had to do with sin. All right, and people would bring offerings to God of a lesser degree. They would offer grain or, you know, smaller things. You know, smaller. These were peace offerings, things not meant to be atonements for wrongs done. But it could be even an atonement for a wrong done. You want to come be reconciled to God. He's saying, you want to be reconciled to God? Well, first be reconciled to your brother. You know, if you can't be reconciled with your brother who is right there in front of you, how do you expect to be reconciled with God who you cannot see? You know, and it was said, I'm trying to think of, why was I having trouble, you know, if you can't love, is it love? You know, if someone right in front of you, if you can't, you know, get along with them, let's just say, why would you expect that you could get along with God if you can't be reconciled with your brother? And he's saying, instead of trying to be reconciled with God and doing your religious, putting on your religious show, maybe, or, you know, or even if it's not a show, you may be sincere. You want to be reconciled to God. They're saying, well, does your brother have something against you? And if he does, leave your gift, you know, meaning leave off what you're doing, stop right where you are, go your way, first be reconciled with your brother, and then come before God. I mean, what he's saying is, it is more pleasing to God that you should be reconciled with your brother than that you should bring some gift to the altar. Is that God wants us to be reconciled with our brothers and not have disputes between us and anger between us and unkind words between us. But rather, first we should sort things out among ourselves before we seek to have things sorted out between us from God. In verse 25, he says, agree with your adversary quickly, while you are in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto you, thou shalt by no means come out thence, till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. What we're talking about here is some sort of judicial proceeding, or a legal adversary. You know, there's a plaintiff and the defendant. There's there's a simple idea of a legal adversary, and then and so what that might mean is like you owe someone money, and what he's saying, come to an agreement with them quickly, while you were in the way, while you are on the way to the place of judgment. Lest you get there, you've been silent the whole time, and then he just brings forth his complaint, and you can get delivered to the judge take to the officer, and you're cast into prison. Because that's how they dealt with debts back then. And he's saying, come to an agreement before you come to the place of judgment. And it kind of goes back to the last thing, like if your brother has something against you, go and be reconciled to him before you come before God. If your adversary has something against you, go be reconciled with him before you end up into the civil civil court, whatever, before the magistrate, the judge. Don't wait. It's like like people get in trouble with credit card debt, right? And I had this problem in my deep past too, and I learned, one thing I remember is, and I did is, when they call, take their calls and talk to them. Don't ignore collections. Just talking to them and telling them what the situation is. Send them a tiny bit of money, whatever you can spare if possible, can go a long way to keeping them from going to court, getting a judgment against you, and then they throw a lien on your bank account. They don't throw you into prison anymore for debt, but they can and will go after you. They will go after your assets. They will go after your property. And if you don't have a conversation with them, if you just ignore them, they will not go away, but they will come and get your stuff and get your money and take it from you. And you will by no means get away with, whatever it is that you've gotten yourself into until you've paid them. You can make, but the thing is, instead of going to court, if you can, settle. If you can't, see if you can come to some other agreement. It can be very difficult, and we have all kinds of protections. Like if you absolutely can't pay, there's bankruptcy and stuff, and it's not, the most desirable outcome. But, the point is, don't get yourself into trouble through lack of communication. And don't let your communications get you into trouble. Just like with the murder, what you say to your brother can be along the lines of murder. And if you don't talk to your brother about the problems you have against each other, God's not going to hear you. God doesn't want to hear about reconciliation between you and God when you won't even reconcile yourself to your brother who has something against you. He wants us to be faithful in least so we can be faithful in much. If we're faithful in the small things, we will be faithful in the big things. It is possible for people to be faithful in big things and maybe have small things not. So, I was wondering about that. I was like, okay, but wait a second. Someone could be not a murderer, but then do other things like insult and so on and so forth. Yes, true. But it is also true that if someone is what's the word? Attentive, a stickler, if someone is following the least commandments, like they're not insulting, they're not name calling, they are quick to reconcile, they're quick to settle debts. If they're doing that, then the likelihood is that the greater things, of course, they're doing also. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in that which is much. It's true someone could be faithful in the big things, but not in the small things. But if they're faithful in big things, there's no you wouldn't know by that. Like, oh, he's not a murderer. You wouldn't know about all the little things. That wouldn't tell you anything at all. Most people aren't murderers. But if they were faithful in every little thing, if in small things we are faithful, then we know that we are faithful in good things. Or people will have a good idea that, someone who is attentive to even the least forms of righteousness, they are likely going to be performers of the greatest forms of righteousness. So that concludes this study. We've kind of addressed the first of these commandments, though it is not the first commandment of the 10. The 10 commandments start off with, I am the Lord your God. You shall have, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. But this is the civil commandments. Thou shalt not kill. The second 5. The 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. It doesn't go through all of them, but the point is well taken, though. There's more to the commandments than the outward expression of the greatest manifestation of that evil. I mean, the commandments address the greatest, especially these sort of, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. They cover, just got a little something there. They cover like the greatest manifestations of the evils that men do, but there are lesser, and Jesus is saying that there's more to this than what you're putting under consideration. It goes down to the very least. I don't like people who teach and try to put in loopholes and say, oh, you can call your brother names, you can do this and that, and it's acceptable. There's no degrading name you should ever use, really. Certainly not directly at a person. Directed at an idea, it is a little more, you can say communism is such a foolish idea. But you will offend people who believe in communism. So you gotta, it's not easy. When you're raised in a world that's very cruel and very unkind, ungenerous, and I'm a part of that too. And so this is, an area that I don't have perfected. I still, it's a lot easier to just say that's stupid than to actually say what's wrong with it. You know what I mean? To go through the detail of like why an idea is not a good idea. I was going to say ungood idea. Oh, how about my English? Is hold on. I should just go end the study so I can go cough somewhere. Anyways, let's conclude this. I think I'm gonna end the stream, and there's a question someone asked, and I'm gonna address that in a stream right after this one. So hold on to your hats. I'll be back in about however long it takes this stream to complete, maybe 10 minutes. My name is Paul Strangini. This has been Line by Line Bible Studies. It looks like that. Thanks for joining me in this study. I look forward to studying with you again tomorrow, and we will continue in the Sermon on the Mount, Part 10. Or Gospel of Matthew, Part 10, continuing the Sermon on the Mount, blah, 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 blah. Thanks, and we'll see you soon. Tomorrow. My engineer is defective. There we go.